it's Mary Lynn.
Who are all these people, though?
I don't know. I thought we were just going to get together and talk about our patterns.
Oh.
You know what we have, though, is the leftovers.
We should share those with them.
We should. We have some leftovers from our tutorial on Monday. These packets are little samples. They're abstracts of all the patterns, and we've lined them up along the edge of the stage. And what we're hoping is that by the end of the talk, all of these little packets will disappear.
So if you're going to take them, take a whole packet, and you get a summary of the patterns.
How many patterns have we got?
I heard 61.
Is
and
it?
You know
let's
what?
see.
I heard they were up there in the cloud.
Did you?
All 61 of them.
Oh my gosh, the cloud held.
Oh, hey!
It's Nico.
The pattern girls.
Hey! Nico!
Hey, you are here?
It's the patterns guy.
Doing something important right now?
We
here?
are.
We are.
We're
We were gonna
busy.
sit
Can I ask you some
We
questions?
invited all
Oh,
these
what's
people
that?
to hear all about these patterns. We did.
That's all your patterns?
I
all
know.
of our
Isn't
patterns.
it amazing?
Well,
Wow.
patterns belong to a community, so they're all their patterns, too.
And is it all from your book? I don't know. It's 10 years old now, the book, huh?
That's true. That's true. We started writing, do you realize, over 20 years ago?
Yes, 20 years ago.
I think I was 6.
And I was not
And you
born.
weren't even born
I
yet.
wasn't born.
I know. For 20 years, we've been working on all of these patterns. And yes, some of them are from the original book, Fearless Change, which was published in 2005. But then...
And then we kept working on the patterns. We didn't stop. We kept working and working and working over the next 10 years. And in 2015, we published another book called More Fearless Change. And now we're up to 61. And so we just continue to work. And maybe someday there will be an even more fearless change. I don't know.
So is it... I'm confused. Sorry. Is it that the new book will have new patterns and I have to buy both books?
Of course you have to buy both books.
10
What are you
copies of
talking
both
about?
books.
Actually, the second book, More Fearless Change, includes all of the patterns from the original book, plus the new patterns. So really, should we say this? Really, all you need is the second book.
Okay, but it's... And the old patterns are...
Actually, you can grab a packet for free.
But they're all gone.
No, there's one left.
More,
There's
more.
one left here.
Those are just the summaries.
Yes.
Okay, so, sorry. First of all, I have to send all my friends that you are here.
Okay.
And maybe they have some questions I can later ask.
Well, if there are good questions, we're happy to address them. And remember, each of us is going to pick the most interesting question, and that person will get a free book. So let's hear those interesting questions.
But, sorry.
I bet he has
I
questions.
also
bet he
have
does.
some
Yeah.
questions.
I'll bet he does.
Is that okay if I start with my questions?
Yes,
Well,
of
okay.
course.
So here's my question.
Does he count? Did we give him a book if we like
No.
the
No, I
first
think we're
one?
going to give him a T-shirt.
That will be stupid questions. That's for the beginners.
Okay.
So here's the question. What is the order of these patterns? Which one is the most important one? Which pattern do I have to use first?
Well, I don't know that you'd have the most important one, but the one that you'd want to think about using first is the Evangelist pattern. So this is the person that is you. The person who's the energizer for the idea, the person that has the passion and the belief in the idea to keep a sustained momentum, which is another pattern, and keep on going. And the reason we call it the evangelist is because you have to have that belief in the idea, even though others, and even there's a part of yourself, you may not even know for sure that it can happen. Which reminds me of another pattern that's important in the beginning, and that is the know yourself pattern. So often people start charging into leading something and don't stop and think, what is the level that I really care about doing this? What are my personal resources? What are my external resources? What do I really know about myself that will allow me to keep on going with this through lots of adversity? When might I want to give up? Most importantly, what don't I know and where do I need help? What are the skills I don't have? And that is the know yourself pattern. So the two I would start with, evangelist and know yourself. What do you think about that, Linda?
I think it sounds pretty good, and maybe it's time for a little survey. Let's ask the audience, how many of you are intelligent?
I see some that haven't raised their hands.
Let's see, 42 people are intelligent. And because you're intelligent, you know that all your decisions are made rationally. 22. So some of your decisions are not rational. Could I ask you, sir, back there, the rational decision maker, are you married? Would you say that's a rational decision? Well, we know there might be some things that we do that are not rational, but unfortunately, what we've learned from cognitive neuroscience is that none of our decisions are rational. And if you begin your change effort thinking that all you have to do is create a list of reasons, a nice logical argument, your PowerPoint slide that explains why your idea is a good one, and that's it, then you're not going to take advantage of some of the patterns we have for you here, because we realize that it's most important to make an emotional connection, and so you have to believe in your idea. That's the evangelist pattern.
Okay, so we have the first and important, no, the first pattern you say, not the most important one, but the first one is an evangelist.
And the know yourself. Evangelist has to know yourself.
So if I'm found the evangelist, or if I am the evangelist, what would be the first thing I have to do?
That's a good question. We get that question a lot.
Oh,
and
that's a surprise.
Yeah, we do. We get that. What do you do first? And, well, it depends. It depends on your organization. It depends on the problems facing you. It depends on your context. So maybe the first thing you have to do is find out more about the idea. Maybe you came from a conference. Maybe you went to the fabulous OOP conference and you learned these new things, and so you know a little bit about it, and you want to bring that idea into your organization, but you don't know enough to really make it happen quickly. So you form a study group, and you can ask for help during that study group and start to form a group identity, another pattern, around the idea, so the idea is not just about you. Maybe you need to, following the study group or during the study group or before that, get the idea out, recognizing that people learn about things in different ways. So the persistent PR you might have to keep doing. You might have to create an elevator pitch for your idea. Or you might run into people who want to help you, and those are the innovators. They're excited about the idea. So there's a lot of different things that you could do first, depending on what problems you have in front of you. Because the pattern that you choose is dependent upon the problem that you have in front of you. So different people in different organizational contexts will have different problems to face.
I just noticed these two young ladies over here.
Who
Do you
are
see
they?
them? Aren't they wonderful? They're writing down what we're saying.
Really?
Yes, and drawing little pictures. Are they not marvelous? Have you seen some of their work?
Wow.
Yeah.
We better say things that are true then.
I know. They're going to get it down there in
And they're
green and
filming
purple,
back there,
and
too,
we're going to be
yeah.
in trouble. The reason why we can't point to specific, detailed instructions for how you are going to lead change as an evangelist in your organization is because we don't know. And not only that, you don't know. I'm suspicious if anybody says, I know how to change an organization and here are the steps for doing that. I'm suspicious. Because we know that organizations and the people in those organizations are what are called complex adaptive systems. And we know that those systems do not change in a linear fashion. We know that they are complex and therefore unpredictable. And whenever you do anything inside a complex adaptive system, you cannot predict what will be the result. So your approach has to be of a series of experiments. You have to try. Mary Lynn gave you some good ideas for things to try in the beginning. You have to use an experimental approach with those patterns, try it, and then stand back and observe as you would a complex system to see, well, what's the result of applying that pattern? And on the basis of that behavior, now I will think about what the next small experiment will be. So a series of the pattern we have is baby steps, where you examine the result of applying any pattern with the idea of almost a scientific experiment, hypothesis, testing, analysis, looking for success and building on that is the only way to sustainable change.
Wait a minute. This sounds a little bit like a woman thing. I mean, what I learned is just take your power as CEO and make the change. Make it happen. So what's the problem with that?
You're right. That will work. I did hear a CEO once of a large telecom company after I had presented some of the patterns, and he said, "Linda, this is a waste of my time. I don't need these patterns. I tell people what I want them to do, and if they don't do it, I fire them." So we know that's very effective. Firing people, or even better, killing them. We have a presidential candidate right now who says he can walk down the street and kill people. Well, we know killing is also very effective. You do this, or I will kill you. That does get people to change. The problem with that kind of change is that it's called compliance. They're doing it because you are threatening them. They're doing it because you have said specifically, this is the way I want you to go, and if you don't follow my lead, then I'm going to get rid of you in some fashion. And we know that with compliance, yes, you do get the behavior you want to see, but only as long as you are observant and as long as you're careful to make sure that somebody is watching to see whether or not people are being compliant. So the overhead for that kind of compliance regulation only increases over time, because compliance also builds resistance. People in a setting like that immediately begin to find ways why they don't want to comply. And they only do it because of the regulation, and they look for constant ways around it. So you have building resistance, increasing overhead for regulation. It's very expensive. And in the long run is not sustainable, because as soon as your back is turned, as soon as some of that regulation begins to fall apart and your attention is directed elsewhere, then they begin to revert to the old ways. So what you want is commitment. You want people to do it because they also believe. They become evangelists. They think it's a good idea. And that's what our pattern language is about, is using techniques, strategies, or patterns so that you influence people to believe in your idea.
And what's also important is these strategies, these patterns, can be used by people with no power. We have the term called powerless leader. And anybody who wants to make a change, whether you're the high-level CEO or an intern who's 20 years old coming into an organization, anyone with a good idea in your mind, can make these patterns happen, can make change happen with these patterns. So I ask you, how many people have a good idea in their head? You're all smart people. How many people have perfect organizations? Okay, nobody's raising their hand. And you're all smart people because I saw you raise your hand when Linda asked. So I bet all of you have an idea in your head for making your organization better. These patterns allow you to do that, step-by-step approach. Think of them as tools, just as if you were working on your home and fixing things, you would grab different tools depending on the problem that you have. And eventually, whatever you were remodeling was suddenly different. It had changed. So because we don't want compliance, we want commitment. We want people to be so involved and interested that they want to change. And that's where the emotional connection comes in. To talk to people like they are human beings and to work with them like they're human beings rather than constantly giving them a set of bullet points and saying, well, don't you cognitively understand this? Therefore, you should agree. And if you don't agree, then you must be stupid, right? You don't understand. So instead, recognizing some of our patterns that are based more on the emotional side of humans, and one of those is personal touch. Talk to people, each person, about how the change will affect him or her. Shoulder to cry on, accepting that that person is also thinking about what they will lose in the change, because by definition, change involves gain and loss. And we're constantly talking about what the change will give us. And that person is probably thinking about what are they going to lose as a result of this change. You know, what maybe a skill set they had, maybe time, what are they going to lose? So there are many patterns up here that look at a hometown story is another one. Tell a story rather than using a bunch of statistics. Tell a story that people can repeat. Allow them to imagine the future, a better world with this idea or the world without this idea. That's the imagine that pattern. So that's how you get more commitment rather than compliance, recognizing people are human.
Okay, I have the first question from one of my friends. Fabian sent me an interesting question, and I think he found the first flaw in your pattern language.
And what's his name?
He's saying, humor is very important, but none of your patterns seems to deal with humor. Is there something wrong?
Well, actually, the emotional connection pattern does. And we actually describe that in the pattern, how one of the ways that you can create an emotional connection with somebody is to enjoy something, have fun, have humor, and laugh together. You know, dancing together, singing together also helps, but that may not be appropriate for the workplace. But humor is part of the emotional connection pattern. So I think Fabio, is that his name?
Fabian.
Fabian understands part of the emotional connection pattern, because that's one way to implement it.
And my favorite pattern is do food.
Oh, there you go. That gets
You got to have a sense of humor if you're going to go out and buy donuts.
Yeah. So there's a lot of that within the pattern language.
Okay.
That
Because
is a
we're
good
funny
question,
people.
though.
We're funny. Have you noticed that?
You're funny?
Yeah, we're funny.
I know that. I know that.
To work
So-
20 years together, we have to be funny together, right?
Okay. So I find a question I personally have, if that's okay.
Yes.
How do you deal with people not willing to commit?
Oh, you think there'd be any of those?
Oh, I think so.
Yeah, well,
The
we have...
resistors.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we have two patterns, at least two. There's actually a lot more, but the most important one for dealing with skeptics is the fear-less pattern. When you have a person that you disagree with, you're going one way and the person's going the other way. And often you're meeting in the middle and you're both just pushing. And there's a lot of fear. You fear them and they fear you. What if you changed that around and said, look, I recognize you disagree with me. I disagree with you. We recognize that. But how about if you tell me why? What's wrong with this idea? What am I missing? So I'm using, rather than fear, I'm using an approach of less fear. I'm saying, tell me what you think so I can learn about the idea. Because I've got We have this term in the United States, rose-colored glasses, right? I think the idea is perfect because it's an idea that I came up with or my team came up with. So fearless is an important pattern for dealing with skeptics. So instead of running away from them, right, or ignoring them, saying, I want to talk to you. I want to find out what you know, what you can teach me. Champion skeptic is another one that says, why don't we put this person, the skeptic, on our team? If this is a person who really is complaining because they want to make things better, rather than complaining just to complain, avoid those people, but complaining to make things better, bring them on the team as the official skeptic so they can find the things that are wrong. Pick your battles is another one. Easier path is another one, removing obstacles. So there's quite a few patterns to help deal with skeptics. And why do these work, Linda?
Well, it's unfortunate that what we want, if we run into people who don't like our idea, and that's always going to happen, is that we want to do something to stamp out those people. We either want to ignore them personally, as you said, we want to run away, or we want to do something to show them how wrong they are. I once took part in a workshop at a conference where we tried to make a list of all the objections that people might have to Agile development. And then we made a corresponding list of all the arguments that you could make to those objections, as though now we could say, aha, we have solved that problem. If anyone raises any of those objections, then we simply counter with our nice argument. Now, I'm assuming that you at some time have run into someone who doesn't like your ideas. And I'm also assuming that maybe you've tried that approach. And your conversation was a little bit like, it was like a duel. And you made your point, and then you received, and then you pointed and received, and your goal throughout that entire exercise was to finally land a fatal blow by saying, ha! I win. That's the goal, to win, to overcome any objection by killing the other person, by proving to them how wrong they are. Well, I'm here to tell you, as someone who's lived through a lot of those duels, that you'll never convince, you'll never influence anyone by making them feel stupid. Let me show you how wrong you are. Let me show you that you don't really understand Agile. You've got it all wrong. Let me point out to you how stupid you are. Whereas if you use fearless, and now you become the listener, the learner, the open-minded person who said, I want to understand your objections. I want you to help me understand my new idea by sharing your point of view. I'm going to learn something. I'm going to learn something about the idea. I'm going to learn something about you. I'm going to learn something about the organization. I'm going to learn something about the idea itself. And we will both come out of that experience better for it. That is so hard to do. That is so worthwhile.
Do you have any more questions?
I have. First, I have to understand your answer.
Yes, the what? What did he say?
No, I mean emotionally understand. That's, for Germans, that's an issue. Why, by the way, did you stop with 61 patterns? I would expect in IT world it's at least
You wanted
64. And my
yes.
friend Thomas B. is asking exactly that question. Do you think you found every possible pattern now?
Not
or
even.
did you get bored searching?
No. No. The first book had 48. When we went to publication, that's where we were. We added more, and when the second book had 61 when we went to publication, that's where we were. We are continuing, because remember, writing a pattern does not mean just sitting in a hotel room somewhere and writing away, as we tended to do. We'd meet halfway between where she lives and I live. But also taking them to Plop conferences, having them shepherded, having them brought before the community, learning the known uses, have people beat up on them. And that's why it takes many, 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 many years to write one pattern.
What is a Plop conference,
Oh, a
by the
Plop
way?
conference. It's a funny name, isn't it?
Yeah.
You want to tell them about Plop conferences?
So in the beginning, when people started being interested in patterns, they said, well, I might have an idea that could be a pattern. What should I do about that? And so the notion of a patterns conference was created, a place for people who are interested in writing patterns, where you can gather and look at other works, get ideas, have other people give you feedback on your ideas, and those patterns conferences are called Plops. There are lots of examples of Plops. There's one in Kloster-Irsee, just outside Munich. It's called Europlop. It's probably the best, I think. It's my favorite.
Best beer.
It's my favorite Plop.
Is this
Absolutely.
conference where they have free beer in the evening?
They
Yes,
do.
and yeah.
Oh, okay.
Maybe that's their.
I heard about that.
Maybe that's why they're so successful. Is the free beer in the evening? I hadn't thought of that exactly.
There's no
but
pattern with alcohol involved, or is it?
I don't know.
Plop stands for Pattern Languages of Programming, is the original reason. And you have to have patterns reviewed and shepherded at these conferences.
But I think the important thing for us is that Christopher Alexander, anybody heard of Christopher Alexander? So he created the notion of patterns, and those of us in software stole that idea and tried to apply it. He said patterns are living things. He was really deeply concerned about quality of life. And he said it's the job of the patterns writer, the patterns creator, to come up with ideas that are going to make human life better. And that job never ends. So there are lots of people writing patterns, lots of books being published. They put that book on the shelf and then they leave it. I think Mary Lynn and I are the only ones, I think we should call attention to that. We are the only ones who have continued to grow and improve and nurture all the patterns that we have created. The new book has, yes, original patterns, but they've been touched up a little bit. We had done a little refactoring, I suppose you could say. So we're the gardeners or the keepers of these patterns, and we're not looking for a magic number. We don't know when the journey will end. Do I have another 10 years? I don't know.
But Yorick is also asking here, will there be at least an anti-pattern book? You like that question?
For those of you that are not as familiar with patterns as others, recognize that this is just not what Linda and I had in our heads. The patterns come from interviewing and talking to hundreds and hundreds, probably thousands and thousands of people who have led change and tell us their successful practices. And so we hear these over and over again, and when we hear a successful practice many, many, many times, some people say the rule of 3, but hear it many, many times, then we start turning it into a pattern, and we have it refined by the community. That means people leading change. We have it when we did the refactoring. We had our community help, lots and lots and lots and lots of people. So these people are looking at it and saying, is this a good strategy to help us lead change? And how do we need to edit this one? What do we need to add to Hometown Story? Oh, we need to change emotional connection, the problem statement, make it different. We need to have different negative and positive consequences. So the patterns tell you what to do. And at the end of the patterns, you have the positive consequences of what happened and also the negative consequences of what could possibly happen by doing anything, because anything you do has positive and negative consequences. The problem with anti-patterns is it doesn't tell you what to do, but
There's
it tells you
no solution. It's a pattern without a
there's
solution.
so it's telling you what not to do.
Don't do that.
Don't do that. Well, what do you do, right? It reminds me of raising my daughter. If I told her what not to do, that's helping her, sort of, right? But what to do is so much more important, right? So the answer, that's my, do you want to add to that? That's the long.
No, I agree. I'm not a fan of anti-patterns simply because there is no solution. They are patterns. It's just the author of those patterns has no solution other than, this is a bad idea, don't do that. So I don't find that helpful.
Yeah.
And it's been a contentious point of discussion in the patterns community for a long time. And there were several books of anti-patterns that did appear. Some of them were also discussed at Plops. Yes.
So you also don't see some meta patterns, so patterns that to some extent are on the higher level. And this is a question also I got here, which means that we have some peer level where we can deal with patterns, with your patterns?
This does have a structure if we were going to do that. There are some patterns that are more abstract, that are higher level than others. For instance, the pattern ask for help now has a lot of sub-patterns or implementation patterns. Ask for help says the most important thing you can do to involve somebody else in your change effort is to go up to them and say, I can't do everything that's necessary, and I know you have a special talent or a contribution to make. Would you help me? And underneath that are flavors. So one of the flavors, for instance, is innovator. The innovator is somebody who just loves new ideas. And they get excited about new things. And they're easy to bring into your change effort simply by saying, you know, I know that you're somebody who's interested in new things. I've just been to this wonderful OOP conference. I've got a great idea. I'd like to try to see if our team could experiment with that. Would you help me? So innovator is one way of asking for help. You want to give another? Or connector is another one.
Mm-hmm. There's lots of, and when you ask for help, you ask for help, you eventually build a group identity, which is another pattern around the idea. So it isn't just about you.
In fact, I would say that the follow-on book, the second book, has a lot of what are implementation patterns, whereas the original book had a lot of the meta patterns or the higher level patterns. Mm-hmm. Not that we did that intentionally, it's that we sort of discovered these along the way. Here's a way of asking for help. Should we document that as a separate pattern? A good discussion.
When you're continually learning, you find out, 20 years of continually learning, you tend to find out what's at the higher level and what's at the meta level and what's more at the implementation level.
But regarding the innovator, I think that reminds me of the question Martin has, who was talking about his experience with Evangelist in IT, or his expectation what might happen, that they just pray the next hype.
That's true.
And then that this is something good and a sustainable idea. So how do you distinguish between good ideas and the hype?
Oh, good question.
Well, so to go back to the first part of that question is that innovators do get excited about new things and they don't usually stick around. So they're not good for certain parts of the change management effort. They're very good at the beginning because they want to get excited about the new thing. Now, are they going to stay with you for the long haul? In fact, there's a wonderful book by E.M. Rogers, that's where all of these terms come from anyway, about how innovation spreads throughout a population. And the innovators are involved in the beginning.
Then they get bored.
Because they love new things. Mm-hmm. But you also have to involve other people, like the early adopters. The early adopters are open to new things. They don't necessarily jump up and down and get excited about every new thing, but they will stay with you through the implementation stage. And so you need innovators Easy, just tell them it's a new cool thing. You also need early adopters because they will stay with you for the long haul, and also they're more respected within your community. Did I answer your question?
So that you answered
I
the
think
first
so.
half and the
I have
second
to-
half?
yeah.
The second half was how can you tell if something is a good idea, right? If I
yeah.
remember that correctly.
Yeah.
So that, what, do you take that?
Sorry, I was like, oh, that's right. That was the second part of the question.
Well, I'll take it and you can follow
ahead.
up on it.
Sure,
So
yeah.
you don't. The answer is you don't. You are the evangelist, and the reason that we chose that name, evangelist, well, because if you Google business evangelist, it really is a term, but also because evangelist just suggests a belief in something that you don't know for sure. But as the evangelist or the group of evangelists, because remember you want to get a group identity around the idea so it's not just about you, that thing John is doing, but you believe in the idea enough to keep going forward with it. And you have what's called another pattern, an evolving vision, which means your original vision you think is a good idea, and you find as you learn along the way, you're using these patterns and you're taking time for reflection, which is another pattern, and you're learning you might need to change what that idea originally was into something else. So that's what you do with an idea. You don't definitely label it good or bad. It's just an idea, and you think it's a good idea, you believe in it, and you watch, should it evolve, should it change? Don't hang on to it if it's not something that looks like along the way as you learn is not going to work.
You should take a scientific approach,
Yeah?
which is a small experiment based on some hypothesis that you make, and then after the test, you examine the results, you do analysis. And if you're doing that with an open scientific attitude, then you should be learning not only about your organization and what things work well and what things don't work so well, but about the idea itself. So I don't believe that Agile is Agile. What one company does with Agile is not necessarily going to be what another company does with Agile. Context is not only something you have to consider for patterns, but also for any process or any organizational practice. And you should be continually learning, and you should be continually adapting. But that doesn't mean that what you're going to do today is what some other organization does today. The important thing is that you're both learning, and you're both experimenting, and you're both trying to improve with small experiments. But there isn't any way that anybody can come in and say, well, this is what you should be doing. I, as an outsider, can tell you how to live your lives. That's impossible. Or how you should work. What's the best way for you to work? That's what we're trying to get away from, isn't it? The idea that there is some kind of standard to which we should all adhere and march in lockstep and do the same thing in the same way day after day. That's a leftover from the industrial age, just like what you're doing right now. You sit, you listen, I talk.
Hey, no, they're asking questions
wait a
too.
moment. Yeah, I
trying to get around that.
I have a
We're throwing
few
questions.
questions left.
Okay.
And the one is, of course, why is there not a Chuck Norris pattern?
Is that what they mean by Chuck Norris?
Well, that goes back to the compliance thing, don't you
the
think?
compliance
I mean,
versus commitment.
yeah.
We need only a short answer.
So,
here.
okay,
Actually,
I'll
we
give you
do
the short.
have a Chuck Norris pattern. It's called Guru on Your Side.
Yeah, but I'm thinking of those two that we talk about in the second book. These two different managers we met, and one said, "Okay, we're making this change in the organization," and he outsourced the people stuff of the change to some other organization to take care of, some contractor to take care of the people stuff. Where in this other organization, this manager said, "You know, I'm ready to make these, or ask these people, help these people, do something really difficult, make this change. I better understand them. I better understand their needs. I better understand their worries. I better understand their personalities, because I'm about ready to make them do something difficult." To me, the second person recognized that the Chuck Norris approach is not going to work. The first guy was kind of looking at Chuck Norris.
But our
So-
flavor of the Chuck Norris pattern would be guru on your side. Because what we know
Okay.
is that in all organizations, there are influential people. And many, not just the technical, the developers, the testers, but also management usually looks to those influential people. And if those influential people are on your side, that is, if they believe as well as you do that your idea is a good one, that it has promise, then you're going to have a lot more success because other people are looking to them as opinion leaders, not because they're going to take them out into the alley and beat them up, but because they respect them. So they have enormous respect within the organization, and that respect allows them to have wide influence. So they can help move people in a given direction, not by force, but by influence.
So time is almost over. Maybe there is one question, but maybe the answer might take 30 more minutes. It's over. It's over.
She's the boss.
Gods, it's over.
She's the boss.
So
When it's
you
over,
helped
it's
me a
over.
lot. Thank you very much and
All right.
goodbye.
Who's winning
Who's
the book?
winning the
book?
book?
So for me, it's the guy who asked about humor.
Oh, yeah.
I'm glad it was
That
you.
was my favorite, too. Not to see the questions. What were the questions again? That was my favorite, too. So,
You said also this one,
what?
when it was asked about the distinguish good idea from bad.
Oh, yeah. How do you distinguish a good idea from hype? And the answer is you can't.
Oh,
You
that's
got to
good.
believe in it.
That
And
is good.
who was the name on that?
Somebody come.
Martin?
All right,
Is that Martin over there?
cool.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you for coming.